It is -20 degrees outside. The wind is screaming, snow is falling fast and hard. There is no house here, no brick walls, no heater plugged into a wall. Just a tent made of wood and animal skin. And inside that tent a family is sleeping. Warm, safe, comfortable, no freezing, no shivering. Just deep, peaceful sleep while a storm rages outside. Pauses. How is this even possible? Today we are going to answer that question, and by the end you will understand something that most people never think about. You will understand how Native Americans slept in tents without freezing to death even in the harshest winters on Earth. Let's first understand who we are talking about. Native Americans were not one single group of people. They were many different nations, each with their own language, their own customs, and their own land. The Lakota lived on the open plains where winter winds could freeze a man in minutes. The Blackfoot lived in the cold north close to what is now Canada. The Cheyenne, the Crow, and the Comanche also called these freezing lands their home. These were people who did not run from winter, they did not hide from it. They learned it, studied it, and found a way to live inside it warm and safe year after year for thousands of years. Their secret was a tent called the teepee. Now when most people hear the word tent they think of something thin, something weak, something that barely blocks the wind. But the teepee was nothing like that. The teepee was one of the smartest shelters ever built by human hands long before science had a name for the things it was doing. Let's start with how it was built. The frame was made from long straight poles usually cut from pine or cedar trees. These poles were light but very strong so they could stand tall against heavy wind without breaking. Around this frame the builders wrapped animal skin, most often bison hide. Sometimes it took 12 hides to cover one teepee, sometimes it took 20. The narrow top also served a purpose. It let smoke rise and escape while stopping cold air from rushing in from above. But the real secret to staying warm was not just the shape of the teepee. It was what was placed inside it. The floor of the teepee was never left bare. First, thick layers of animal hide were laid down across the ground. These hides created a soft layer of trapped air between the cold earth and the people sleeping above it. Air, it turns out, is one of the best materials in the world for holding in heat. This is the exact same idea behind the sleeping pads that campers buy today. The only difference is that native families discovered this simple truth hundreds of years before any store existed to sell it to them. On top of this floor families used thick sleeping robes. These were not thin blankets. They were heavy double-layered bison hides, sometimes 5 to 7 centimeters thick. A person would climb inside one of these robes almost like climbing into a sleeping bag. The soft fur faced inward, resting close against the skin and holding body heat right where it was needed. The tough outer hide faced outward, blocking wind and keeping moisture away. In a real sense, a sleeping person was wrapped inside the warmth of an animal. And this simple method kept people alive even when outside temperatures dropped to -30 degrees. -30. Think about that for a moment. That is cold enough to freeze skin in minutes if left uncovered, yet inside the teepee people slept peacefully through it. The way people arranged themselves inside the teepee also mattered. A small fire was placed in the very center. Family members slept in a circle around it, close enough to share warmth but never too close to be unsafe. Even a small fire gave off steady heat, and the walls of the teepee trapped that heat inside the same way a cup holds water without letting it spill out. Now you might be thinking, if there is a fire burning inside a closed tent, would the smoke not choke everyone inside? This is where the design becomes even more clever. At the very top of the teepee were 2 flaps known as smoke flaps. These flaps could be adjusted from inside using long wooden poles. Depending on which direction the wind was blowing, a family could angle the flaps to let smoke escape freely while still keeping cold air from pouring in. In simple words, this was an early form of ventilation control made completely by hand, using nothing but wood hide and careful understanding of how air and wind behave. And the design did not stop there. Many teepees also had an inner liner, an extra layer of hide hung from about shoulder height down to the ground, creating a small gap between the liner and the outer wall of the tent. Cold air that managed to sneak in near the bottom of the teepee would get caught in this gap. Instead of reaching the sleeping family, that cold air would rise upward and escape through the smoke hole at the top, pulled along by the heat of the fire. In other words, the teepee used the cold air against itself, turning it into part of its own airflow system. Staying warm did not start inside the teepee. It actually started with choosing the right place to set it up. Native families did not just place their teepees anywhere on open land. They studied the ground carefully before winter arrived. They looked for low valleys, thick tree lines, and spots protected from the strongest winds. A teepee placed behind a row of trees or along a sheltered riverbank could avoid the full force of a winter storm, while a teepee placed on open flat ground would face wind with nothing to slow it down. This kind of planning saved enormous amounts of energy and heat before a single fire was even lit. The direction the teepee faced mattered too. Most teepees were set up with their entrance facing east, away from the strong western and northern winds that carried the harshest cold. This simple choice meant that every time someone opened the entrance flap, they were not letting a blast of freezing air rush straight inside. Even something as small as the direction a door faced was part of the larger plan to stay warm and safe. Families also moved their camps depending on the season. In the coldest months, many groups moved into wooded low-lying areas that offered natural protection from wind while keeping close access to firewood and water. This meant that survival was never left to chance. Long before the first snow fell, entire communities had already chosen the safest, warmest place to spend the winter. Showing just how much planning and observation went into a way of life that outsiders often mistook as simple. Here is a fact that might surprise you. Teepees were often warmer inside than the wooden cabins built by early European settlers. Settlers had brick fireplaces, wooden floors, and solid walls. Yet many of them suffered through freezing nights, while native families living nearby inside what settlers called simple tents stayed warm and safe. Old journals from settlers in the East describe nights of terrible cold inside their own homes, while their native neighbors slept comfortably just a short distance away. In time, some settlers even began copying parts of the teepee design themselves. Not out of curiosity, but because it simply worked better. Staying warm, however, was never only about the teepee. It was part of an entire way of living built around surviving winter successfully. Long before the cold season arrived, families spent weeks and months preparing. They dried and smoked meat so there would be enough food to last through the harshest months. They sewed layered clothing with soft fur worn close to the skin and tougher hide worn on the outside to block wind. They also understood something simple but powerful about food. Rich, high-fat meals kept the body warm from the inside, almost like fuel for an internal fire. A mixture called pemmican, made from dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries, was small but packed with energy. A single piece could keep a person going for hours even in freezing weather. Was built with careful thought, passed down from parents to children generation after generation. This was not guesswork. This was knowledge earned through experience and refined over thousands of years. And this is where the story becomes more than just information about tents. Because staying warm was never just about survival. It was about life continuing even in the coldest months. While snow piled up outside, children still played inside the teepee. Elders told stories by the fire. Families ate together, laughed together, and slept side by side, breathing the same warm air. Protected from a storm that could kill without shelter and knowledge. It is easy to look back and feel sorry for people who lived in tents instead of houses. But that way of thinking misses the point completely. These families were not lacking anything. They had found something that many modern people still struggle to understand. That surviving